So, good morning. Today we have Eliza with us. And Eliza, tell us a little bit about what it is and who you are so everybody knows what information you're bringing.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me on today. And I am a bankruptcy attorney. I'm actually a certified specialist. I work in Los Angeles, but I do service clients throughout California. So we file bankruptcies as far north as San Francisco, as far south as San Diego. But we do, our main focus is Southern California. So we file bankruptcy for people. We also help people settle their debts. So let's say people who don't want to file bankruptcy or can't file bankruptcy because for a variety of reasons, we help them to at least, reduce the amount of debt they do owe.
Got it. Okay, great. So would that be similar to when a corporation does a restructuring?
It is similar, but people can actually restructure their debts.
Oh, they can.
Okay. So there's so many different options when it comes to debt resolution, which is kind of like debt resolution is like kind of the umbrella term we use. And then under debt resolution, there's bankruptcy. And under bankruptcy, there's like several different kinds of bankruptcies that people may have heard about in the news, different chapters. So the restructuring chapters that you generally hear about are Chapter 11 and Chapter 13.
Right, correct. And that's, you're saying, is both individuals as well as corporations?
Individuals can do a Chapter 11, corporations can do a Chapter 11, but only individuals can do a Chapter 13. So a Chapter 13 is like a mini Chapter 11 in a way.
Okay. And when I talk to people a lot of times, and I have, and you've been really great at helping some of my people, so thank you. But when I talk to people, there's a stigma with them. They could be drowning, and helping them resolve debt could be such a great way out. But it's like they're very uncomfortable about doing that. It's almost like a character issue for them. Can you talk about that a little bit? What you see?
Absolutely. So I kind of liken it to going on, when, let's say if you have cold symptoms and you go on WebMD, you put in your symptoms and you see the worst. You see, oh my God, I have this disease or I have that disease. And so going online and Googling bankruptcy and credit, sometimes you'll get misinformation. So as far as the stigma, it really is just kind of, I think, a remnant of the past. Maybe in the past, it was much harder to rebuild credit after someone filed a bankruptcy. These days, sometimes bankruptcy can actually improve your credit. Yeah, so that sounds very counterintuitive. How would bankruptcy improve my credit? Well, if you look at it from a creditor's perspective, even a landlord, let's say you're a landlord and you want to rent a unit out to a tenant, and you look at their credit report and you see delinquent debt. Okay, then you look at another tenant and you see a tenant who filed bankruptcy and has no debt.
Yeah.
Who is in a better financial position?
Definitely the one that got rid of the debt and is starting clean. And I also heard, is this true that once you file bankruptcy, once you can't do it more than a certain number of times or with a certain number of years in between? Is anything of that true?
So there is a limit on certain bankruptcies. Chapter 7, which is also known as, pardon me. Pardon me.
Oh, no worries.
Also known as liquidation. Chapter 7, the limit on that is every 8 years.
Got it.
But Chapter 13, although there's no real limit, you don't want to be a serial filer and file like have it get dismissed and file again. But Chapter 13, there's more flexibility, and that's restructuring. That's basically taking your debt and saying, hey, I'm behind on my mortgage, but I want to keep my property. Please give me extra time to pay what I'm behind over a 5-year period.
Got it. Okay, got it. So what are you seeing with COVID-19? I would imagine, and we were chatting a little earlier about it, that we're probably going to see an increase in bankruptcies going on. Can you talk what you're seeing, just your thoughts, just anything?
Yeah, so before the COVID-19 situation, I had clients who were making more money. I saw creditors not taking, or creditors being a lot tougher in the settlement realm. And that's because there was so much money in the market, there was so much equity, and there was just, we were really in a state of prosperity.
Right.
So bankruptcies had kind of come to a plateau. They were not going down, and they were not necessarily going up. They were just kind of stabilized, which was kind of the first sign that, you know, something might be changing. So with the COVID-19 crisis, it just kind of, I think, tipped that, just tipped that scale. The first few weeks, our phones were completely quiet. I think people were just trying to figure out, how long is this going to last? Is this going to be a temporary thing? Is this going to be a more long-term thing? Now we're getting some more calls than we were before the crisis. So I believe, I haven't looked at statistics, but I believe there will be an increase in filings, just because the government lockdowns and mandates closing businesses is really affecting people's livelihood.
Except, you know, the thing I worry about, well, not worry about, I think about with that is, what about the fact that if you're furloughed, if you're unemployed, there's been an increase through the state of California on getting unemployment, so that your income is actually covered throughout this time. So therefore, I'm curious as to, well, if you've still got that income coming in, and they're letting it go longer than they normally do because they're recognizing COVID, you can't go out and look for work per se. Why is there still an uptick on the bankruptcies? Unless they're using this as a time to realize that they'd really fallen and maybe now's a good time to deal with it.
I think a lot of people were just holding on
Yeah.
to their circumstances. But let's say someone who's self-employed, they can't apply for unemployment.
No,
So,
but they do have, that's a good thing, and I think that's a lot of the misnomer. They can't apply for unemployment insurance, but the Payroll Protection Act is available to self-employed individuals. The problem with that, the flip side with that, though, is they've already run out of money and they're arguing about the next amount of money. So it's not going to be there for everybody, but it is available.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, it is available, but yeah, a lot of banks have run out of it, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of ambiguity as to whether these funds are going to be grants or loans, and we really don't know
I
as far
think,
as.
again, I've sort of studied that just because as a money manager, and from that aspect, helping people just to help you if there's interest. What I have found is it's actually pretty clear on what will be forgiven and what will not be forgiven. They're giving us 10 years to pay back at 1%. I mean, that's unbelievable. And so that's pretty good. And there are companies out there that'll help you actually track how this money is spent so that you'll be able to get it easily forgiven. So thank God there is that. The problem is, like you said, you can't get it. They're now, I read yesterday, they're out of money. So anybody that's
Yeah.
going to get it's already been approved.
Yeah.
And if you did the math on number of small businesses of independent owners against the amount of money there was, if everybody got an equal share, it was like $20 a person. Woohoo!
Right.
Not going to
Yeah.
get us anywhere. But I understand. So talking about the bankruptcy side, like, I'm more concerned about the longer term effects that people really need to look at this, because right now there might be unemployment and eventually will go. COVID will come to some kind of a change, whatever that is, at some point in the future. And then the problem is we've got a lot of these big companies that are starting to file bankruptcy and are actually shutting down, which means there won't be anywhere for the employees to go. And now you're going to have an influx of employees and ending to your unemployment insurance and debt issues. So that's kind of what I think it's probably. Do you think it's probably better to get ahead of it then, or wait until you're in that second half?
People don't really consider bankruptcy until they are generally in dire straits, or until
Okay.
they cannot make their next payments on their credit cards or rent. So it's always good to know your options. There's no harm in exploring what your options are. But if someone is still making income and they're able to pay their bills, then they might not even qualify for a bankruptcy yet. So
They
with
really have to have fallen off that ledge.
in certain circumstances, there are bankruptcies that are not income dependent, and it's something that's a lot of lawyers don't even know about. But basically, for example, if your non-consumer debt exceeds your consumer debt, then you can qualify for a Chapter 7 regardless of what your income is.
Okay.
just based on the nature of the debt.
And the benefit of doing that, if that was the case, so when you say non-consumer debt, are you talking about like a mortgage?
No, I'm talking about taxes,
Okay.
student loans, business debt. It could be a mortgage on a commercial property, like a mortgage on a rental property. Um, so those are things that are considered non-consumer.
Got it.
So people who have tax debt, people who, you don't see it a lot now. That was more like in 2008 through 2011 when people had multiple properties and their mortgages had defaulted. So a lot of those people were able to qualify under what we call the non-consumer Chapter 7.
Okay. And for someone like that, what is that doing? It's just restructuring the debt. It's giving them longer to pay at different terms.
No, you can actually file a bankruptcy and discharge your debt.
And wow, that's awesome.
But but it's not for everyone. So if you have, so within Chapter 7, there are only so many assets that you can exempt. What that means is there's certain statutes that allow you to keep a certain amount of property, even though you're filing a bankruptcy. So even if you might qualify for a Chapter 7, doesn't mean that you should file Chapter 7.
Correct. Understood. And what about, you mentioned both taxes and the student loans, and I thought that my understanding was you couldn't get those ever discharged.
Taxes you can. So taxes are dischargeable. They have to meet certain requirements.
Okay.
So it has to be 3 years from the date they're due. And there's an analysis on that. It has to be 2 years from the date they're filed. They could not be assessed within the last
say 6 months or so.
Yes.
An assessment.
Yes.
You have to prove that you've had trouble doing that.
Well, you have to meet all these requirements. So like if you owe taxes from like 2018 or even 2017, you're not going to be able to get rid of them till 3 years. So you can get rid of older tax debt. That's basically the summary. Student loans are considered not dischargeable. However, there is something that you can file in a bankruptcy called an adversary proceeding. It's not for everyone and it's not a common thing. But the other good news is that private student loans, you can actually settle those, just like you would settle a credit card debt.
Interesting. So if it's been sold, if you've refinanced with another company.
Even if it hasn't been sold.
Interesting.
If it's private.
So would a Sallie Mae be considered private?
It depends.
Okay.
So it depends on the underlying, you have to look at your account basically.
Got it. Okay, got it. Now, I was having a conversation with an apartment landlord, and it was really fascinating because the information out there almost implied that if you have rent and you're suffering from COVID, you don't have to make those payments. And she was explaining to me, no, it's not forgiveness of payments, it's delay. And she says the delay stops at least today as of May 31, and then you've got 6 months to pay it back on top of your regular rent. And a lot of people I don't think are aware of that. And I think those are the people that might find themselves really getting into financial distress. Can you talk about that at all in your own opinion?
Definitely. So when people watch the news, they just hear the sound bites of, rent, a moratorium on evictions.
Yes.
And people think, oh, I don't have to pay rent. This is rent forgiveness, like you were saying. But that is a big misconception. And if people stop paying their rent and not setting that money aside or not figuring out some sort of contingency plan, then they will have a bill once they have to pay that back, and it's going to be a large bill. So unless they're planning to move and file bankruptcy, that's one way they could get rid of the rent that they owe, but that means they're going to have to be moving. So if they're in a rent-controlled apartment, that doesn't really make financial sense. So these are definitely things that people should be thinking about and looking into and communicating with their landlords and explaining, hey, I got a pay cut because of the current crisis. If you can give me some extra time, but definitely it's not rent forgiveness.
So we're just trying to guess here, but I was thinking, so, she was mentioning, if someone's not able to, then they'll evict them. And
I'm so
after
sorry,
the moratorium.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, you got
Oh,
cut out.
so if someone, after the moratorium, when they're now needing to pay their rent and the extra amount they're due, if they don't do that, then they will be evicted, and they will still go after them for the missing amount of money, and it will mess up with their credit. Yes, but then if they file bankruptcy, do you see the prior negative credit and the bankruptcy? Like, what do you kind of see on the credit?
Yeah, so an eviction on a credit report, you will see that even if you file a bankruptcy. So we always tell our clients you don't want to have an eviction.
Got it. That's important. That's really great. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you think would be interesting for folks out there to think about as they're going through all of this right now? Like, when should they pick up the phone and call someone like you? When should they take it to the next step? What is your general advice on that?
So I generally discourage people from going into their retirement to try to pay living expenses or to try to pay bills. And it's something that people do because they see money in their IRA and they see they don't have money right now and they think, okay, well, let me go into my IRA and take this money out. So when they're getting to that point where they don't have income to pay their, their expenses that they generally need to be paying, or even if they anticipate that they won't have that income, if they see kind of the writing on the wall, if they have a business that they think is not going to, survive, then I provide free consultations. So I'm always happy to give people advice. And a lot of times that advice is you don't need to file bankruptcy, or you should not file bankruptcy. You should try to settle your debt. Or if you do settle your debt, this is how it will negatively impact you. So it's always good to, be thinking about your finances, especially right now when things are uncertain and we don't know what's going to happen. It's always good to explore that.
The other thing I hear people say when I talk to them and they are in that dire strait, they say not only the consultation, but they can't afford the cost of filing bankruptcy. Could you talk to that? But what is it that they'd be looking at?
So just to file a bankruptcy, unless you could get a fee waiver, there is a filing fee. And for a Chapter 7 in California, it's $335. For a Chapter 13, it's $310. For Chapter 11, it's closer to $2,000 because Chapter 11s are a lot more expensive. So Chapter 11 is definitely a very expensive option as far as bankruptcy goes, but that's generally for not everyone. It's kind of like a company who needs to restructure, or if you have like millions of dollars.
Or a more sophisticated investor with income
Exactly.
who, maybe you own commercial property and there's no rent coming in now. And,
Exactly.
Why would you go after your own assets
Yes.
if you don't have to?
Right. So that's Chapter 11. Chapter 13 is also a little more expensive than a Chapter 7, but that's for people who can't pay their mortgage and want to avoid foreclosure, or people who can't do a Chapter 7 because they have assets or they make too much money. Right. So Chapter 13 is also, it's not as expensive as a Chapter 11, but you're looking at around, $5,000 to $6,000.
Got it. Okay, got it.
Right. And then Chapter 7 is generally the lower as far as the fees that you're looking at. And for Chapter 7s, generally you're looking, it depends on the attorney as well. For Chapter 7s, there are some attorneys out there who, are saying, oh, we filed bankruptcy for $700. Well, they're not telling you what they're including in that. They're not telling you if you're never going to talk to a lawyer. So, there's anywhere from $700 to $5,000.
Exactly. A lot of it's also the time. You're not doing this, you also need to pay your own rents and mortgages. And so we can't afford to do that for free. So there's going to be a cost associated. How do you get paid on something like that when they're struggling with even their income? Is there a retainer then that they put aside so they've got the money to afford the filing fees and fees that might come your way?
Yes, so we work with our clients on a payment plan. We cannot file a Chapter 7 particularly until we are paid in full, because then we become a creditor. So we're not allowed to really do that. Chapter 13s, we're more flexible, so we can do part of the payment up front, depending on the complexity of the case. If it's very complex, you know, we might need a full amount upfront in Chapter 13. But Chapter 7s, you know, we work with our clients based on their financial circumstances. But we do require the payment to be paid upfront. And as far as our firm's like range of fees, it's, you know, anywhere between $1,600 to $6,000.
Right, depends on sophistication, I'd
On the
imagine.
complexity.
I think this is great. Thank you for being a resource for people and allowing them this information, because I think it's a scary time, and you know, we need to know what our options are. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And we'll list your information at the bottom of the video.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.